Welcome to Innovator Insights, where we explore the minds shaping the future of tomorrow's leaders. In this episode, Scott sits down with Dr. Rachelle Dené Poth, educator, attorney, consultant, author of 10 books, and AI strategist. With over 2 decades in the classroom and a unique background bridging law, technology, and teaching, we'll hear why vulnerability fuels creativity, how AI is helping students become entrepreneurs, and why learning is always a two-way street. Let's dive in.
With your background in law, education, and tech, what's your quick take on who an innovator really is these days?
Oh, that's a great question, and I love it. So, I love the word innovation. First of all, for a couple of different reasons. Because years ago, when I would hear the word innovation, even myself, I thought that it was kind of scary. And I've spoken to people over the years also who feel like the word innovation means you have to do something that's really like grand and big and involves technology and a lot of time
Right.
and effort. But it really isn't. It's just the idea of doing something new. And so for me, years ago, like being innovative in my classroom was using stations in my classroom. I had changed the setup of the room, and it made a big difference on the impact of my students. And so like I changed my mindset. And when I've spoken to other educators over the years, I've tried to help them see that too. It's not that it necessarily involves some flashy new technologies or anything about that. I think it's a lot of it ties into like your mindset and
Sure.
being I mean, for me, it was like about being flexible, taking some risks, being curious, getting away from kind of, and this is full transparency, like that's the way I've always done it, or this is how I learned, this is how I was taught. And I think that that applies across the board in anything that you do. When you take that step out and you try something that's slightly different to you, and it still may be uncomfortable depending on what it is, because if you've always, in education, you've always taught a certain way, and then now you're bringing in technology or you're trying a different method, like say project-based learning, then that might feel uncomfortable because you don't have as much experience, but that's okay because we always have to be learning and pushing ourselves. So I don't know that that's really a quick take, but that's the Rachelle quick take.
It's still a great answer, though. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Well, welcome to the Innovator Insights podcast. I'm Scott Fisher. I'm in New York today. Today's guest is an educator, consultant, author, attorney, and keynote speaker. So welcome to the show. Could you please tell us who you are, introduce yourself, and a little bit about your background?
Yes, of course. Well, thank you for having me. I am Rachelle Dené Poth. I do a lot of different things in education. I'm a longtime educator. Then I got my law degree about 7 years after teaching. I was still teaching full time and going to law school here in Pittsburgh in the evening. So I often joke that I was actually living in schools like students may think that we do. Have a master's, and then I just recently last year got my doctorate in instructional technology with a focus on the need for professional development and AI. So I've taught French in the past, longtime Spanish teacher as well, and I have a course that's for 8th graders on STEAM, what's next in emerging technology, which is really fun for me to teach because I think back to when I was their age, which was a while ago, and what technology was like and the interesting things that were happening in the world. And so I try to give them a lot of different experiences. So that's really how I got started with AI and augmented virtual reality, coding, metaverse, you name it, anything and everything that I find to be interesting. So I keep pretty busy with that and consulting and all the things because I just like learning and working with educators and my students.
So to summarize, you're an underachiever, correct?
Yeah.
Is that
I
fair to
do
say?
sleep though. I do sleep.
Oh,
So
I know. What's the expression? I'll sleep when I die, or something to
yes.
that
Yeah.
effect. All right. Well, you mentioned AI. So let's talk about AI in the classroom. And what's one surprising way that you've seen AI turn students into innovators?
This, I have told this story so many times, and this is actually, I have to think about the number of years ago it was now. I feel like it was definitely before ChatGPT came out in the end of 2022, but it was after I had been teaching about AI in my classes for about 4 years before that. And this happened a few summers ago. We had a group of students come in as part of a cohort that my school district is connected with here in Pennsylvania. And we had this program, Belong in STEM. And the students came in 4 different Saturdays in May, and we had guest speakers. Somebody who spoke about actually runs Penn State's Readiness Institute and does a lot of work with AI, did a lot of work here in Pittsburgh, was actually involved in I think the first middle school in the country years ago that had an AI curriculum put in place. So we had him come in and speak. We had another company come in and speak about coding and robots and augmented virtual reality. We took students on some sites, some local businesses and industries. And then in the summer, they came in for 4 days in July from around like 8:30 in the morning until I think like 1:30. And again, they were from like 14 different schools. And the point of that was kind of almost like a camp for them where we still had people come in and speak with them, but they had to work together to use some of those technologies to address the sustainable development goals. And so we had all the 17 SDGs up on the board, on the wall, and the students went around to find something that was really interesting and meaningful to them. And over the course of those actually 3.5 days, the students ended up pairing up in small groups and designing using AI and trying to be innovative how they could use AI in the other technologies they learned about to solve or present a solution to some of those challenges. And then at the end of that time on that Thursday, we had kind of like an open community event. Families and friends came in and the students did presentations and just seeing what their ideas were. That was an amazing experience. And then even at the end of that day, that one young man said, "Well, what do we do tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, you just stay home." But no, I want to come back. And so that was really quite innovative then. But now with all of the other tools that we have that we're seeing with AI, I've met a couple of high school students in the past 6 to 8 months who have designed apps and full-blown LMS platforms
Wow.
on AI, and they're in high school and they are, entrepreneurs. They're creating their product, they're getting feedback, they're doing a lot of the different things that we want the students to do by learning about it and how to use it for good. And actually, they're creating these products, some for students to help students study and some for educators to help them provide more for students. So it's been awesome to see, in my own experience with them, but also getting to talk to those two specific students who are still in high school creating these platforms.
So if I understand you correctly, their focus is not yet monetization.
Right.
Okay, that's
Right.
good.
Yeah.
They're doing it for the love of it. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really what it comes down to. That's great.
Yeah.
Terrific. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about global collaboration. Can you tell me any examples that you might have of students from different cultures that have been innovating together recently?
Yeah. So in over the years in my classes in Spanish, we started project-based learning, which I had misunderstood. I thought I was doing PBL in my classroom for years. Actually, you talk about the art of reflection. I wrote an article about it. Somebody asked me to write years ago. I said, "Oh, of course, I'm doing PBL. It isn't everybody." So I wrote this article, and then flash forward a couple of years, I read a couple of different books about PBL, looked at PBL works, and I thought, oh my goodness, I have not been doing PBL. I've been doing like learning based on projects, very linear. So I dove into this with my students and I connected using, different platforms to get them connected with students in Argentina and in Spain and also a school in Mexico. And they tied into learning about the SDGs also, and then collaborated with those students in those different countries by using the technology available to them. So when we first started, we were using things like Flipgrid, then Flip, other learning platforms, just to have those conversations. We were using collaborative boards like Padlet to have, for them to learn. And the students that I have, when they would do their, presentations for their classmates, some of them at first were like, I actually did not do project-based learning. I just did a project. And they felt like you could see it and you could hear it in their voices. Like they were reading from their slides or they had notes or cards. And then there were students who may have just created some model of something, or they just stood up and they had like an image, or I had one student that made a Padlet with embedded videos, and they didn't need to look at anything. They just spoke about it in a very natural, authentic way. And when they were done, the two biggest things that really hit me that they said, one student said, "This is the first time in my high school career I stopped caring about grades." And they said, "I don't care if I get an F on this." I was like, "Well, you're not going to get an F on this," because that was like
Right.
really amazing. But they said it was just so interesting to learn and to connect with those students and to just, plan on my own journey. Like, what do I want to know? What am I curious about? What do I need to improve upon? And then the other student said, I have never been able to learn like this, where I could actually talk to somebody who is living in Argentina, going to a school, is living a very different experience than what we're used to, and actually understand that more closely. Like I could read about it, I could watch a video on it, I could hear you as the teacher talk about it. So that was just amazing. I mean, not just for them, but for me also, because I got to work with those other educators, and my students taught their students about these different technology tools and then our cultures. And it was just such a great experience, and it has lasted and created friendships for years. And so it's something that I wish I would have done sooner. But you didn't know. I always say I'm learning as I go. So
Of course, absolutely. No, it sounds like a wonderful experience for everybody, the teachers and the students, which is terrific. So
yeah.
that sounds great. So with all the different technology, with all the new ed tech that's popping up, how do you decide what's generally innovative versus what's just a fleeting trend?
Great question. I've heard that question be asked a lot lately, especially when it comes to AI. Like, is it going to go away? Is it going to disappear? And when I started speaking about AI, in this case, for example, I started learning about it 8 years ago. I started teaching about it 7 years ago, and there wasn't really a lot like now. There's so many tools, but there were a lot of different digital tools and technologies back then, and they continue to be, populating the market. But I always think about what are your goals? What is something in your classroom that might be a challenge or there's a disconnect? Like for me, when I first started to use more tech in my classroom, it goes back years ago where my main problem was students were coming to me for help and I was either in a meeting or I missed them or I was teaching class and they couldn't get the access to if they needed resources or an answer from me. And so I thought about, well, how can I make this better for them? And I found a messaging app. And then they said, how can I access the assignments or anything? So then I found Edmodo at the time. That goes back many years.
Yeah.
And I just little by little added things on because I was noticing different things happening in my classroom. And so I always bring it back to, okay, is there something that, and even with AI too, I say, what is something that is very time consuming, challenging? You feel like you've taught it so many different ways that you need something that's fresh or new and you need some ideas, then find the tool to use it or find the activity for it. For many years doing presentations at conferences, because I like sharing things and helping other educators and it's fun for me because I learn as well. But for probably the first 5 years, I was always focused on the tool. Here's this tool, here's what it does. But then I realized the tools are not always going to stay. The features may change, they might disappear. And then I started to focus on like the methods, because then when you focus on the methods and the strategies, and then whether you're in person, you're teaching virtually, or any whatever other variables might happen, then if you have to make a shift, then you find some type of a technology or tool that's going to continue to let you facilitate that. And so I think that it's, great to think about in your own space, what do I want more for my students? Like, are they not speaking up in class? Do I want them to be like taking ownership? Which for me, I was always at the front of the room, very teacher-led, teacher-focused.
Mhm.
And then when I broke up those desks, that led me down the path of like student-focused and student-led. And again, it was uncomfortable at first because I was so nervous. Like, what are people
It
going to
was
think?
new
Am
to
I
you, right?
teaching? Yeah.
Right.
But it's just sometimes it's just those little things that really they may not in your initial sense. Like for me, I thought, well, that's really not innovative. I just moved furniture, but it was so new to me that it really brought in a lot of other changes. And so it can't just be like one little shift that makes a big difference. But if it has a longer term effect, then it's less likely to be just this passing trend that's going to disappear. So when you talk about student voice and student driven learning and student agency, then that's the path to go on.
Okay. Now, do you have any thoughts on the idea that I'm hearing more and more of a rumble about the fact that, some of these larger companies like the Geminis, the Chat GPTs and so forth, they're more than capable at this point of doing most of what the other flashy products that are being targeted at educators can do. So do you see a point at where maybe the need for certain large popular products on the market these days may go away because people are having access to the same type of tools through the products that they get through Google, through their Google subscription or their Microsoft subscription?
I know that I've been involved in a lot of conversations about that, and I've been reading up on just comments that people post on social media and concerns, and I hope not, because especially with educators and the training, I've done some recent trainings and have people reach out to me with emails or anything asking questions about like what should I use, ChatGPT, Gemini, and using them, I say it's probably, it has to be a given that you're going to use one of those. And in
Mhm.
schools, some recent schools I've been in, they've just opened up Gemini for their teachers to use. So that's great to have that. But for that sense of security and data privacy and all of those things we want in education, having those platforms that are specific to education, I think is what makes a difference. And so I hope that they stay and stick around, because a lot of people who may be kind of hesitant to put information in or to use some of those larger platforms uh, may not then want to use AI at all, which is going to put students at a disadvantage because they're not going
Sure.
to understand how to use it. So I hope that there are a lot of tools out there to choose from, and finding some that that are keeping the privacy in mind, that are in alignment with all the different laws, legal considerations that they need to focus on, but that offer a variety of things for teachers that are educationally focused, which again, with ChatGPT or Gemini, you can do a lot of the same things, but there are some things that you can't do with that you can do with some of those platforms, especially if you want to put it in the hands of the students and let them talk with a chatbot or have a tutor, things like that, and know that their information is not going to kind of go all over the place. I think
Right.
that is going to give more soundness of mind. So hopefully educators will be like, no, they have to stay.
Well, I just I don't want to say it's a concern, but I see where it could possibly be where you're going to have a few people rise to the top and the others are going to fall off, because there's so much overlap between
Mm,
a lot of these companies and what's going on, that there's probably not enough market out there to support all of them. So you're probably going to see some key players stick around, with some of the smaller ones unfortunately falling
yeah.
off, you know?
Yeah.
All right. So now what about educators who don't have access to all the fancy tech? Is there a simple way to spark, that innovative mindset in their students without the fancy tech?
Yeah, and this kind of ties into, I think about the teachers I've worked with. A lot of the educators that I've spoken with more recently, especially at the elementary level, are interested in bringing in AI, but there's a big concern about the tech and having students be on the screens and the use of text so long and so much. And so I always say, you can have so many great learning experience and opportunities just with having conversations and talking about it, because that's with AI in my class. When I started, we didn't have all of these tools. We had some other larger things to think about, and there were some lessons that were out there in organizations that had activities that you could do. But asking students to think about, where do you see AI, for example? What are some ways that we might use it? Um, Conversations, like what questions do you have about it, like sparking curiosity. I think you don't always need the tech. I love the conversations and learning that happens, because I think that precursor is, especially like the young students, is understanding like, what is AI? Where do we see it? What are some examples? And understanding the terminology that is involved in it, and building those AI literacy skills that we're hearing so much about as well, because it's not something that they're going to learn overnight. It's going to continue to change. And so that ongoing, adding more to it, just starting with the basics and building out. And even though a lot of the platforms have things that you can use for students at that young age level, they may not be able to type into it, but they have the voice to text, for example. But it's finding a balance and getting them involved in it in some capacity, but being open to the conversation. So,
Right. And I think you might have touched on the next thing I was going to bring up, was that feeling of being overwhelmed by all the new technology,
yeah.
um, and maybe advice for those teachers that are feeling, overwhelmed. And I think maybe you hit on, start small and
Mhm.
expand out. But is there any further advice that you could tell them to sort of ease their anxiety about, the overwhelming amount of technology?
Yeah, it's, you don't have to do all the things. Like I said earlier as well, like when I started to use more tools in my classroom, not like games or things I was using with teaching languages, but platforms for game based learning or interactive lessons or anything like that, or those messaging apps, it was because I noticed that disconnect. And so that was the one starting point. And I've used a lot of technology my whole life, so I'm used to it. But I also was thinking about the perspective of the students. And if I'm, throwing on a lot of different tools for them, that's overwhelming to them as well, and the family supporting them at home. And so I always tie it back to thinking about, okay, what's one small change that you could do? So maybe in your classroom, just hypothetically speaking, you want students to learn about project based learning in the elementary level. then you start with that. And then maybe there's some type of collaborative space that they can post on, or they can interact with, or they can use iPads and draw, designs for it. It's just little things along the way. And you don't have to be the expert for all of that either. Like, you just need to know enough to get started with something. And I'm always transparent and open with my students. I'm like, hey, I think I have a great idea. It may not go well. We're going to try it, and then we'll evaluate, and please give me your feedback. And they are honest with me, and they'll say, wow, that was great. Can we do that again? Or sometimes like, yeah, I don't really think that went the way it should have. But it's a good model to set for them too, because you want to try new things, and it's just one new strategy or one new tool, and it's one step at a time.
So now, in your book, True Story, you suggest that learning goes both ways. So we're talking about the teachers and the students. Is there one particular student that stands out to you, or one lesson that you picked up from a student in regards to innovation or perseverance?
Oh my goodness. Yes, there are so many in that book, True Story Lessons That One Kid Taught Us, is one of my favorites, because it's not just my stories. There's 37 other educators that put stories into it. And reading their stories and just thinking like, oh yeah, I had a student like that. Like, I never recognized the impact of students on us and there's one that really sticks out with me. And this goes back probably 7 years ago now. And I had a student that was in my technology course, came in, not at the beginning of the year, didn't really know too much about them, and was just sitting there side by side working one on one. And just ended up having a conversation and just learned so much about the student, their background, their interests. I had no idea. And I was like, wow, for a while I was seeing the behavior of the student and not the student. And I
Okay.
was reacting a little bit to, because in a technology class, I had a lot of different tools and iPads and all of those things. And you're like, oh no, I got to be careful with them. And so when you have a larger class size, sometimes it's a little bit unnerving to worry about, are things going to get broken in here? And so you would have, and I say you, me in this case, I would have this like reaction where I would automatically think, just based on what I had observed at a distance, or what I potentially had heard in some cases about, like, oh well, they broke this, and I'm like, oh no, what's going to happen? And so I try to you know drown that out a little bit more. I want to know the students. I want to get to know them on my own. And so, having had that time to sit down and work with the student on this project and help them figure out how to do some coding and some other skills like that, we actually had this conversation. And I told my colleagues that day, I said, I feel like really, I couldn't explain it. And I wrote about it in the book, but I did say, like, I actually finally saw the student instead of like these other behaviors, because when they were around all of everybody else, they're touching everybody else's equipment, the computers and all those things. But when I had that time with that one-on-one, and to like listen to the ideas, and the ideas that the student had were like really like high level thinking and innovative, and they were curious and set apart, just that one moment, I was blown away by that conversation. And so I really started to look at my classroom differently in all of my classes. Like, okay, maybe students might misbehave, or they might not be as interested in what I'm trying to teach. Like, oh, we already know everything about AI and all of that. But when you have those moments and those conversations, and you actually like just focus in on the student and what their skill sets are, what their interests are, it made such a difference in for me in that class and all my other classes. I've carried that forward ever since. So that one definitely sticks out for me as well. I mean, the first one. There are others that stick out too.
I'm sure there are many. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great. Now, in addition to your books, you have a podcast. I get the title right here. It's Thrive in EDU. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All
Yeah.
right. So now you talk to a lot of innovators. So I've asked this question in each of my previous episodes to all of the guests in some way, shape, or form. But is there a common trait that you see in most innovators? Are there any shared characteristics that you think these type of people have?
I do, and it actually ties into the word thrive. And thrive actually ties into the book True Story, because that book wasn't organized by like chapters. It was organized by themes of thrive, which stands for tenacity, honesty, relatability, integrity, vulnerability, and empathy. And so, and I even have it on my bracelet. It's I think about it all the time. It's like a lens that I view things through. And in that, the word vulnerability is one that really speaks to me because so many times over the past 10 or 15 years, there have been things that challenges that I've had, whether in teaching or I've had to do a presentation or, any things that we come up against. And I've wanted to back down. I was afraid of taking a risk. And I think that when you are innovating and trying something that's different or new, that may be uncomfortable for you, you are making yourself, you might feel vulnerable.
Mhm.
And in the past, before reading Dr. Brene Brown's book and learning about vulnerability and a speech given by Teddy Roosevelt over 100 years ago, that really changed my thinking where vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. And it's admitting, okay, like, I don't know if this is going to go well. I don't know if it's going to work. I might start it. It might break, any of those types of things. And when you're innovating, whether or not it involves technology, you're just trying something different. It is being vulnerable and saying, I don't know this. I'm willing to learn. I want to reflect on this. And you're transparent in it, but you're not worried about being like perfect. You are just
Mhm.
embracing the opportunity to just like take those risks, see what happens, be curious. Definitely have some courage involved in that. But that's probably the one out of my thrive that comes to mind first. The other ones too, the tenacity, because you want to keep going, but
Right, right.
definitely vulnerability.
Yeah, well, with regards to that vulnerability, I think it might have been when George Couros was on, and he pointed out that he felt it was so important to demonstrate in front of the students
Mhm.
um, when you have a problem, like particularly he was talking about, I think, demonstrating the use of AI and let them see that you struggle with it too as a teacher, that it doesn't just come naturally, it's not just
Right.
immediate, so that you're modeling for them what they're going to experience in the real life and letting them know this is not just you as a student who's has to go through these steps and trials. It happens to teachers as well, so they understand that that's normal for what
Right.
they're doing. You know.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. So now, how do you balance teaching the basics with giving students space to be innovative in your classroom? Because obviously, there's core things you have to cover, and then
Yeah.
there's the whole notion of doing it in an innovative way or giving them the freedom to do it the way they want to or what's exciting to them.
Well, it's funny. I had to get out of my own way to actually be able to do that. And so it goes back to that morning in September years ago when I moved those desks in my room and just started to change things up a little bit. And when I did that, I had students coming to me, and as the only Spanish teacher, they have me however many, potentially 5 years if they take my eighth grade course and 4 years of Spanish. And so that's a long time, but I get to see their growth over time. And I had students coming and saying to me, wow, I like class so much better this year. I'm like, well, I don't really know how I feel about that, but please tell me what you mean. And they said because they got to do different things, they were interacting with their classmates, they felt like they had more access to me. And so that gave me kind of a little bit of like inspiration, but like, okay, this is working. So what else can I do? And I tried different things. I brought in the use of using some like choice boards and the project based learning, like I mentioned, and a lot of other things I really didn't know that much about. But then when I would give them opportunities to do projects, I would say, okay, here's 5 or 6 ideas. And the one thing on the list was like, if you have a better idea, let me know. We'll talk about it. And being open to them. But I remember the first time that that happened was actually before that. I had a student come in and I had a very clear project rubric, what the requirements were, the grading. And I wanted it in this, certain size, and this big poster board came in. Like, that's not exactly what I was looking for, but it was beautiful. The only side thing is it had a lot of glitter on it, and I had glitter everywhere for I don't even know how long. I was in my car, everywhere. But I almost, and I say this, and I've told the story before too, I almost took off points because it wasn't in the structure that I wanted. And I stopped myself and I thought, well, why? Because this student is creative. And in them
Right.
creating this product, I'm learning about their abilities as an artist, what their interests are. And so then when students want to come in, hey, can I make a video? Can I do this? Like being open to that. And it may not necessarily align with like what I think their end product should be. But if at the end of it, they've gone through and they've used the vocab or they've narrated in the verb tense or they've, whatever the content is that we're teaching or that I'm teaching is embedded within that. And then it's more authentic and meaningful for them. Then they're going to retain it more. So I like when I say I had to get out of my own way, I had to stop being like, no, it has to be my way. It has to
Yeah.
be this
Yeah.
way. And being okay with that, even if they didn't ask. I think some of them learn like, ask that whole like do it first and ask for forgiveness later kind of a
Yeah.
thing. But But it has been amazing over the years just seeing what they've created. And I'm not kidding. I have projects from students that I taught when I first started teaching that I've kept, and they're just, no technology involved, just you name it, color, pencils, markers, everything. Um, and I just keep them because they're just such awesome representations. And I actually just gave one menu project back to a student that I still see a couple of weeks ago. And I taught her about 15 years ago. She said, "You still have this?" And it was just kind of funny. I'm like, "Yeah, I keep these things. It's kind of nice to go back to that." But if they get the practice they need and are going to build the skills they need to develop, then however that manifests for them, it's fun. And it's fun for me too, because some of the things they've created, like some of them have made videos, skits, you name it. And then those become resources I can use with their permission in my other classes for other students. And that inspires them. So it's been really awesome.
Plus, for you as an educator, you probably are doing similar lessons year after year after year, or class after class, term after term. So it's probably
Yeah,
nice for you to see a different approach coming from the students as well, to change it up for you a bit, I'd imagine.
definitely.
So now, when we go beyond the school, do you see a role that parents and maybe the communities play in growing what I'll refer to as young innovators?
Yeah, absolutely. I often talk about the importance of connecting home to school and letting families know what's happening in our classrooms. And for me, especially my STEAM class, because we cover a lot of topics like the AI and the coding and cybersecurity and everything. I send information home to let them know what they're doing. Uh, Resources that are available to them, and I share ideas. Like there are a lot of resources that are out there for, hey, here's some STEM activities you could do at home with your family. And even now, it's hard to believe 5 years ago when schools were closed for the period of time. I remember finding things for families to do outside, just to get outside, to do
Yeah.
some STEM activities, to create some things. But I think it's really important to celebrate what learning is happening in the classroom by sharing that in your school community, on your school site, inviting families and people in the community to come in and see. And because then you can have a connecting point too, where maybe that real world learning or place-based learning that students can get involved in, where they connect and they do some work in the community, or they have somebody from the community come in and speak to the students about it, so they see that what they're learning really does have relevance in the
Real
world.
world. Yeah.
But it's that, you want that open communication, that transparency, especially in our world now with so much AI. Uh, who knows? Like those two students I mentioned that are creating things. There are a lot of students out there that they're building their coding skills. They're learning about all of these new technologies. They're interested in building platforms or game based, whatever it is. And so supporting them in school, but also showing and supporting families at home with that, it's going to really make a big difference for all of us.
Okay. Well, I have one last question for you here.
Okay.
So, when it comes to pushing boundaries and igniting new ideas, I understand that you have some experience with fire yourself. Is it true that you can twirl a fire baton?
Yes, in my good old days, I could actually twirl two fire batons. I never I could twirl three regular batons. I had twirled knives as well. Although when
Oh,
people think
boy.
about that, they're not the typical like those kind. They're made for not harming people. But yes, the fire batons were my favorite from years and years ago. And I have some students that, oh boy, I bet 3 years ago they found out. My newer students found out about that, and they said, on the last day of school, we're going outside, and you're going to twirl your fire batons. I was like, okay. And they even put a sign up on my board to remind me. I'm like, I'm actually not going to do that, but we can just leave that sign there and pretend. But yeah, I have been known to do that, but not in recent years. But I'm feeling pressure from various sources that I might actually have to pull those out and try again.
Well, I will tell you that's a very unique qualification. I don't think many people can say that they're capable of doing that.
Yeah, I had a very robust childhood in terms of becoming a majorette and a twirler for many years of my life, all through college at Penn State as a majorette at Penn State, and then I worked with my school district for about 6 years, doing all of the like color guard and the majorettes and rifles, everything, because my high school competed nationally when I went to school. So it was
Wow.
something that I really valued. For many reasons. And it was something that I wanted to recreate in the school that I was teaching into.
Oh, that's terrific. All right. So what's next for you? Is there anything that you're working on or anything that you want to share?
Oh, goodness. Yes. There are a lot of things I'm working on. I'm working on
Feel free.
uh, trying to figure out how to manage all of my open Chrome windows with all the different tabs. But in all seriousness, I'm just continuing to learn. I've
Mhm.
been, like I said, with the AI for a long time, but about a year and a half ago, I started to do some sessions, a lot of research first before sessions on AI and the law, because I wanted to bring in the attorney piece of it. And so I've been working on just trying to get a better grasp on that. So when I work with educators or also started to work with some attorneys too, to help them understand some of the sources or resources that are available to them. And then just building my own knowledge of other things like cybersecurity. Quantum computing has been on my list, doing some reading.
That's all. Yeah.
And I know, and I am working on another book. It's a work in progress. So hopefully, maybe in the next 6 months to 9 months, I might actually have like a draft out there, and we'll see what happens. And then just working with schools or organizations and events just to help work with teachers and hopefully students as well throughout the year.
Well, it sounds like you're keeping yourself very busy and you're continuing to learn and grow. So that's terrific. Listen, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you making the time in your busy schedule to be here today. This has been
Of
really,
course.
really great. A lot of the things we talked about and some of the things that you've shared with me, I'll be sure to put in the show notes as far as links to some of the work you've done and your books and things like that. So thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the invitation and for the great questions. And that last one, I didn't see that one coming, so that was a good one.
See,
Well,
that's what you
not the
get.
last one, the one before the
I know
fire
what
was
you
on.
meant. That's what you get from, I don't know if it was, I don't know, ChatGPT or Gemini. One of them is doing a deep dive on you there. So that's where I came up with that one. But
Yeah.
I'm glad that you were able to expand upon it a little bit and show how that actually fed
What
throughout
that
your life.
meant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Well, thank you again so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
That's a wrap on this episode of Innovator Insights. A huge thanks to Dr. Rachelle Dené Poth for sharing her wisdom on redefining innovation as a mindset, the role of AI in empowering students, and the importance of community in shaping young innovators. If you enjoyed today's conversation, head over to innovatorinsights.io, where you can find more episodes and subscribe to our mailing list for the latest in technology and innovation. And if you found this discussion valuable, please share it with a friend or colleague. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.